I had just stepped into the shower, the warm water cascading down my back, a momentary escape from the noise of the world. The steam enveloped me, and I closed my eyes, letting the tension of the day melt away. Everything was quiet until I heard a faint knock at the bathroom door. "Hey, is anyone in there?" It was Grace, my stepsister. I called out without thinking, "Yeah, I'm in here, Grace. What's up?" There was a slight pause before she responded. "Oh, sorry, never mind." I could hear her hesitation, but I didn't think much of it. Grace and I had been living together for almost a year now, ever since our parents got married. We had always gotten along, but something about the way her voice lingered through the door this time made me feel uneasy. I turned off the water and reached for the towel, quickly wrapping it around my waist. As I stepped out of the shower, I was surprised to see her still standing there, just outside the door. She was fidgeting slightly, her eyes darting between the floor and me. "Is everything okay?" I asked, wiping the droplets of water from my face, feeling a strange mix of concern and confusion. She nodded quickly, but her gaze finally met mine. I needed to ask you something." Her voice was soft, almost too soft, as though she was unsure of what she was about to say. "Sure, what is it?" I replied, leaning slightly against the doorframe, still feeling the warm humidity of the bathroom mix with the cooler air of the hallway. She took a step closer, and suddenly, the space between us felt much smaller than it was. Her presence was more intense than usual, and I couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was different. Her eyes lingered on me, on the bare skin of my chest still damp from the shower. I wanted to talk to you about something important," she started, her voice trembling slightly. My heart picked up its pace, the air around us growing thicker as the seconds ticked by. Grace and I had always been close, but not like this. Not this close. I smiled slightly, trying to ease whatever tension was building. "You can talk to me about anything, you know that." Her lips parted as if to speak, but she hesitated. Instead, she took another step closer, her hand reaching up as if on instinct to touch my arm. I froze at the unexpected contact. Her fingertips barely brushed against my skin, but it was enough to send a ripple of electricity through me. "Grace." My voice was soft, uncertain. Her hand lingered for a moment longer, and then, just as quickly, she pulled it away, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." She turned as if to leave, but something stopped her. She stayed there, frozen, with her back turned to me, shoulders tense, as though struggling with something deeper. I stepped forward without thinking, closing the small gap between us. "Hey, it's okay," I murmured. "You don't have to go." She turned back around slowly, her eyes searching mine for some kind of understanding. "It's not okay," she whispered. "It's not." There was a silence that hung between us, filled with unspoken words, unacknowledged feelings that had been simmering for far too long. I could feel the pull, the gravity of the moment weighing us down, as if we were standing at the edge of something dangerous, something neither of us were prepared to face. "Grace," I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. I didn't know what to say, what to do. Her eyes held mine, filled with something I hadn't seen before, vulnerability, longing, fear. She stepped closer, her breath shaky as she whispered, "Why does it feel like this? Why do you make me feel like this?" My pulse quickened, and I could feel the air between us thickening, growing heavier with each passing second. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "But I feel it too." She closed the distance between us completely, her fingers grazing the damp skin of my chest again. Only this time, she didn't pull away. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, frozen, unable to stop what was happening. Her touch was soft, but it set every nerve on fire. "I can't stop thinking about you," she confessed, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It's wrong, I know it is. But I can't help it." I swallowed hard, every part of me fighting against the pull of her words, the intensity of the moment. "Grace, we can't. We shouldn't." "I know," she breathed, stepping even closer, her body now pressed against mine. "But I can't stop." Her eyes searched mine, pleading for something I wasn't sure I could give. The heat between us was overwhelming, suffocating. Every rational thought in my mind screamed at me to stop, to push her away, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. Before I could say anything more, her lips were on mine. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as though she wasn't sure how I would respond. But when I didn't pull away, when I kissed her back, the intensity grew. Her hands tangled in my damp hair, pulling me closer, and suddenly, we were lost in it. I felt the weight of the situation crashing down around me, but I couldn't stop. Her lips were warm, soft, intoxicating, and I found myself wanting more, needing more. The towel around my waist slipped slightly, but I didn't care. Nothing mattered anymore except her. Except this. The moment felt endless, suspended in a haze of warmth and breathless anticipation. Grace's kiss deepened, her lips moving with a kind of urgency that echoed the intensity simmering between us. I could feel her body trembling against mine, every inch of her pressing closer, seeking something that words could no longer express. I should have stopped it. I knew that. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to break the spell before it crossed into territory we couldn't return from. But my body betrayed me. Every fiber of my being was drawn to her, like a force I couldn't control. Her hands, once tentative, now explored the contours of my chest with growing confidence, her fingers tracing the lines of muscles still damp from the shower. Each touch sent a shiver down my spine, igniting a fire I hadn't known was burning inside me. My breath hitched as her lips moved from my mouth to my jawline, her soft kisses trailing downward, igniting every inch of my skin. "Grace," I whispered, my voice shaky, thick with the emotions warring within me. I reached up, gently cupping her face, trying to pull her back, but the desire in her eyes matched my own. She paused, her forehead resting against mine, both of us breathing heavily in the charged silence that followed. "I've tried so hard to ignore this," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "But I can't. I don't want to." I closed my eyes, torn between the undeniable connection pulling us together and the weight of the reality we were about to face. "We shouldn't," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I could feel how hollow they were. Grace's fingers gently brushed against my cheek, her touch feather-light. "I know," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. "But tell me you don't feel this. Tell me it's not real." I couldn't. My silence said more than I ever could. I didn't push her away. Instead, I found myself leaning into her, my hands trailing down her sides, feeling the delicate fabric of her shirt beneath my fingers. Every touch, every breath felt like it was drawing us deeper into something we couldn't escape. Her lips found mine again, but this time the kiss was different. It was slower, filled with emotion, years of unspoken feelings, of forbidden longing, now unleashed in a single, raw moment. I could taste her hesitation, her fear, but also her undeniable desire. We stumbled back into the bathroom, the heat of the shower still lingering in the air, mingling with the intensity of our closeness. My back hit the cool tile wall, and the contrast against my warm skin sent a jolt through me. Grace pressed herself closer, her hands slipping down to my waist, her fingers brushing the edge of the towel. The thin fabric hung loosely around me, barely clinging to the remnants of restraint we still had. But with each passing second, I could feel it slipping away, just like the towel, just like the boundaries we were crossing. "Grace, we can't go back if..." She silenced me with another kiss, her lips soft but insistent, her hands gripping my sides with a need that mirrored my own. "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I don't care. I don't care anymore." Her confession hung in the air between us, and in that moment, something inside me snapped. The weight of everything we'd been holding back, the tension that had been building for so long, it all came crashing down. I couldn't fight it anymore. I didn't want to. My hands moved of their own accord, sliding up her back, pulling her even closer. The thin barrier of fabric between us was maddening, every touch, every brush of skin against skin sending sparks through me. I could feel her heartbeat racing, matching my own, as we lost ourselves in the heat of the moment. The towel slipped away entirely, pooling at my feet, leaving nothing between us but the overwhelming need we had been trying to deny for so long. Grace's breath hitched as her hands roamed across my bare skin, her touch both hesitant and bold, like she couldn't believe what was happening but couldn't stop it either. We were tangled together, a mess of limbs and heat, the lines between right and wrong blurring with every kiss, every touch. I could feel her shiver against me, her breath catching as I trailed my lips along her neck, tasting the salt of her skin. She moaned softly, her hands gripping my shoulders as if she were afraid to let go. Time seemed to stop, the world outside of this bathroom fading into nothingness. There was only her touch, her breath, her warmth, and the fire that was consuming us both. But as the intensity of the moment reached its peak, something inside me hesitated. A flicker of doubt, a whisper of reason cutting through the haze. I pulled back just for a moment, searching her eyes, looking for something, anything, that would make this feel right. But all I saw was the same desire, the same fear, the same confusion mirrored back at me. "I don't know what this means," I confessed, my voice barely audible, my heart pounding in my chest. "But I can't stop." Grace's eyes softened, her lips parting as she leaned in close, her forehead resting against mine. "Neither can I," she whispered. Grace's words hung between us, delicate yet powerful, as if they were the final surrender to everything we had been trying to deny. I felt my pulse quicken, the last vestiges of restraint slipping away as I closed the remaining distance between us. Her breath mingled with mine, soft and warm, as her lips hovered just a whisper away from another kiss. I reached for her waist, my fingers curling around the soft fabric of her shirt, feeling the gentle rise and fall of her breathing beneath my touch. She didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned in closer, her body molding against mine as though she had been waiting for this moment as much as I had. My hands moved almost of their own accord, sliding beneath the hem of her shirt, the warmth of her skin against my palms making my heart race. I could feel the tension in her body, the trembling anticipation as I lifted the fabric higher, revealing the smooth curve of her back, the softness of her skin. She let out a quiet gasp as the shirt slipped over her head, leaving her bare before me. Her eyes met mine, wide and vulnerable, but filled with the same unspoken longing that had brought us to this point. For a moment, we just stood there, the weight of what we were doing pressing down on us, but neither of us could stop. The world outside this bathroom ceased to exist. No family, no rules, no consequences. Just us, caught in this whirlwind of emotions that we couldn't control. I leaned down, pressing my lips to her collarbone, feeling the way her breath hitched in response. My hands roamed over her skin, tracing the delicate lines of her shoulders, her arms, as though trying to memorize every inch of her. Grace tilted her head back, her eyes fluttering shut as I kissed a path up her neck, the heat between us growing with every passing second. "Is this real?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of our breathing. I didn't have an answer. I couldn't. All I knew was that I didn't want this moment to end. Her hand slid up my chest, her touch sending shivers down my spine. She was hesitant at first, but as her fingers brushed over my skin, her confidence grew. Every touch was like a spark, igniting something deeper inside me, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Without thinking, I pulled her closer, our bodies pressed together, her breath warm against my ear. "I've wanted this for so long," she confessed, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. The honesty in her voice sent a shiver through me, and suddenly, everything felt so much more real, so much more dangerous. But I couldn't stop. I didn't want to. I kissed her again, harder this time, my hands tangling in her hair as I pulled her against me. The heat between us was overwhelming, and I could feel her fingers digging into my skin, pulling me closer, urging me on. We stumbled backward, her back hitting the cool tile wall as I pressed her against it, our kisses growing more urgent, more desperate. Her hands roamed over my body, her touch setting every nerve on fire. My heart was racing, my breath coming in shallow gasps as the intensity of the moment consumed us both. The steam from the shower had long since dissipated, but the air between us was thick, charged with an electricity that neither of us could deny. I could feel her chest rising and falling against mine, her pulse racing beneath my fingers as I trailed them down her side. "Are you sure?" I whispered against her lips, my voice hoarse with emotion. She nodded, her eyes meeting mine with a fierce determination. "I'm sure." With that, the last of my hesitation disappeared. I kissed her again, my hands slipping lower, tracing the curve of her waist, the softness of her skin beneath my fingers. She arched into me, her breath hitching as my hands explored her, the tension between us growing with every touch. We were lost in each other, in the heat of the moment, in the emotions we had tried so hard to suppress. Every kiss, every touch felt like it was tearing down the walls we had built around ourselves, leaving us vulnerable and exposed. But neither of us wanted to stop. Grace let out a soft moan as I pressed my lips to her neck, my hands exploring the contours of her body with growing urgency. I could feel her trembling beneath my touch, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps as the intensity between us built to a breaking point. "I've never," she whispered, her voice trailing off as she looked up at me, her eyes wide and uncertain. I paused, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized the weight of what she was saying. I cupped her face in my hands, my thumb gently brushing across her cheek. "We don't have to do this," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "We can stop." But she shook her head, her gaze never leaving mine. "No," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "I want this. I want you." Her words sent a shiver through me, and I kissed her again, slow and deep, pouring all of the emotions I had been holding back into that single moment. There was no going back now. We had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Our breaths mingled, heavy and fast, the world around us fading into the background as the intensity between us reached its peak. Grace's hands moved with a quiet urgency, her touch sending waves of heat through me, her body trembling with a mixture of desire and vulnerability. I could feel her pulse beneath my fingertips, a steady rhythm that matched the pounding of my own heart. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered word was laced with the weight of the moment, the forbidden nature of what we were doing. But neither of us pulled away. Neither of us wanted to. We were caught in the storm we had created, swept up in something so powerful, so undeniable, that it felt impossible to stop. Her fingers curled around the back of my neck, pulling me closer as our lips met again, this time more urgent, more desperate. The softness of her skin beneath my hands, the warmth of her body pressed against mine, it was all-consuming. And yet, beneath the physical connection, there was something deeper, something raw and emotional that neither of us could fully understand. I trailed my lips along her collarbone, tasting the salt of her skin, feeling her shiver beneath me. She moaned softly, her head tilting back as I kissed a path up her neck, my hands moving lower, exploring the curve of her waist. The tension between us was unbearable, the heat overwhelming, but we couldn't stop. We didn't want to. We moved together, lost in the intensity of the moment, our bodies reacting to each other with a kind of primal need. I could feel her breath hitch as my hands roamed lower, her skin warm and soft beneath my fingertips. She was trembling, her pulse racing, and I knew that we were teetering on the edge of something we couldn't come back from. But just as the tension built to a crescendo, something inside me faltered. I pulled back slightly, my breath ragged, my heart pounding in my chest. Grace looked up at me, her eyes wide and filled with desire, but also something else, uncertainty, fear. The weight of what we were doing, the consequences, suddenly crashed down around me, suffocating in its intensity. "Grace," I whispered, my voice hoarse, my mind screaming at me to stop. "I don't know if we should." Her gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw the same conflict in her eyes. She was just as torn, just as unsure. We had crossed a line, but now that we were standing at the edge of the precipice, we both realized the gravity of the situation. The intensity of our feelings, the physical connection, it all paled in comparison to the emotional turmoil bubbling beneath the surface. She blinked, stepping back slightly, her fingers slipping away from my skin. The silence between us was deafening, thick with everything we weren't saying, everything we couldn't put into words. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze flickering to the floor. This feels so real, but it's so wrong. My heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice, the quiet admission of something we had both been wrestling with. I reached for her hand, my fingers gently entwining with hers. I feel it too, I confessed, my throat tight. But I don't know how to make this right. Grace looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes, and in that moment, I realized just how much this had affected her, how deeply we were both tangled in something we couldn't control. The weight of it all, the confusion, the desire, the guilt, it was crushing us, and neither of us had the answers. We can't keep doing this, she said softly, her voice trembling. It's not just about us. There's too much at stake. I nodded, my chest tightening as the reality of the situation settled in. She was right. As much as we wanted this, as much as we felt drawn to each other, there was no future here. Not like this. The consequences were too great, the pain it would cause too deep. But even as I nodded, even as I tried to convince myself that we had to stop, I couldn't deny the pull I still felt toward her. The connection we had, the unspoken bond that had formed between us, it wasn't something I could easily let go of. And I knew, deep down, that she felt it too. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Grace pulled her hand away from mine, taking a step back, her eyes filled with sadness. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never should have let this happen. Tears welled in my eyes, but I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay composed. It wasn't just you, I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. I'm just as responsible. She nodded, wiping at her eyes, her shoulders trembling with the weight of everything we had shared, everything we were now forced to leave behind. We can't go back, she said, her voice barely audible. Things will never be the same. I didn't have an answer for that. I knew she was right. The line we had crossed couldn't be undone, no matter how much we might wish it could. We were changed, both of us, and there was no going back to the way things had been. Grace turned away, her hand reaching for the doorknob. She paused for a moment, her back to me, as though she were gathering the strength to leave. My heart ached, every part of me wanting to reach for her, to stop her from walking away. But I didn't. I couldn't. I don't know how to fix this, she said quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. But I know we have to try. And with that, she walked out of the bathroom, leaving me standing there, alone, the weight of everything we had just experienced crashing down around me. I stood frozen, my chest heavy with emotions I couldn't fully process, my mind racing with thoughts of what could have been, of the forbidden connection we had shared. The echoes of our kiss, of our touch, still lingered in the air, haunting me with the realization that this wasn't something we could ever truly erase. We had crossed a line that could never be undone, and now we were left to grapple with the consequences, to find a way to live with the weight of our choices. I sank to the floor, my head in my hands, as the overwhelming flood of emotions crashed over me, guilt, desire, confusion, loss. And yet, beneath it all, there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of the connection we had shared, the undeniable pull that had brought us together in the first place. But as much as I wanted to hold on to that feeling, I knew that we had to let it go. There was no future for us, not in the way we had imagined. And as much as it hurt, we had to face the reality of what we had done. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me in the quiet aftermath of a moment that had changed everything. And as the silence settled around me, I realized that some lines, once crossed, could never be undone.